In accordance with the customs of this university, I open the ceremony with a prayer. Spiritus Sancti, gratia illuminet, sensus et corda nostra. Please take your seat. I now give the floor to the candidate for the degree of doctor.
With the permission of the Council of Deans, and in order to obtain the degree of doctor from Radboud University Nijmegen, I would like to defend in public my doctoral thesis entitled On the Analysis of Lead-Specific fMRI. Goedemiddag. Leuk dat jullie gekomen zijn en dat jullie zitten kijken op de livestream. Jullie weten misschien dat ik de afgelopen paar jaar heb gewerkt aan breinen en MRI-scanners en laagjes en iets met een stekelvarken. En in de komende 10 minuten ga ik jullie vertellen waar dat allemaal vandaan komt. Wat ik heb gedaan is, ik ben gaan duiken in de lagen van het brein. En we zijn gaan kijken hoe ver we in kunnen zoomen om in te zoomen op het brein in actie. En te kijken wat we er van kunnen leren. En als je hier de cortex, de grijze stof ziet, zijn die opgedeeld in allemaal kleine laagjes. En we hopen op basis van die laagjes meer te leren over het brein. Ik ga je zo meteen vertellen hoe dat precies werkt. Maar eerst ga ik even een stapje terugnemen naar MRI-scans. Dit is mijn hoofd. Aan de rechterkant een 3D-representatie. Die eerste is wat we noemen een structurele scan. En het duurt ongeveer 10 minuten om die structurele scan te nemen. Maar wat wij vooral hebben gedaan, we hebben geprobeerd erachter te komen wat er omgaat in dat hoofd op het moment dat iemand een taak aan het doen is. Dus die rechter, dat is een plaatje waarvan we iedere 3 seconden ongeveer het hele brein scannen. En wat we daarvan kunnen zien is heel grofweg of ergens activatie in het brein plaatsvindt. En die breinactivatie ziet er ongeveer zo uit. We leggen iemand in een scanner en we laten ze naar een leeg scherm kijken. En tegelijkertijd nemen we plaatjes op. En vervolgens laten we ze bepaalde strepen zien of laten we ze een ander taakje doen. En al die tijd nemen we scans op. En dat herhalen we een paar keer. En in dit geval, als je een visueel plaatje krijgt, zou je dat dus ook in de visuele cortex zien. Dus sommige delen van het brein, dit is achter in het hoofd, dit is voor in het hoofd, daar zie je bijna niks, omdat dat gebieden zijn die weinig te maken hebben met visuele processen. En achter in het hoofd, in de visuele cortex, zie je het signaal omhoog gaan en weer naar beneden gaan. En als je daar vervolgens statistische methodes op loslaat, kan je erachter komen dat inderdaad de achterkant van het brein actief was. Wat wij echter willen, is niet alleen te meten waar iets actief is, wij willen meer weten over wat het doet. En het idee was, laten we kijken of we van activiteit naar functionaliteit kunnen gaan, door niet alleen te zien van deze gebieden in het hoofd praten met elkaar. In plaats daarvan hopen we aan de hand van de laagjes in het brein erachter te komen welk gebied praat nu met welk ander gebied. Het idee is namelijk dat de verschillende lagen van het brein gerelateerd zijn aan juist input ontvangen van dat gebied daar of versturen naar dat gebied daar. En wat wij hopen is op basis van MRI erachter te komen waar de informatieprocessen beginnen en waar ze eindigen. Nou is er één probleem. Ik liet je net zien, die eerste scan duurt 10 minuten om op te nemen. Die tweede gaat 3 seconden, maar, en dat is wel veel sneller, maar zoals de algemene MR Physics terminologie gaat, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Je levert daar iets voor in. En een van de dingen die je daarvoor inlevert, is dat je MRI-scan vervormd raakt. Kijk goed. Dit is namelijk de grootte van de vervorming die je ziet. Dus ik zal het nog een keer laten zien op de volgende slide. Waar we een oplossing voor moeten vinden. Omdat we zo precies willen meten dat die minuscule vervormingen een groot probleem zijn voor ons. Dus wat ik in het eerste hoofdstuk van mijn proefschrift heb gedaan is, vind een oplossing voor deze vervorming. Dus wat je hier ziet, ik heb een computeralgoritme ontwikkeld om te zorgen dat automatisch de computer uitvindt van, dit is hoe het er aan het begin uitziet, dit is hoe het eruit moet zien. Hoe ik dat precies gedaan heb, mag je in de thesis lezen. Vervolgens, dan weten we precies waar we moeten meten en waar die verschillende lagen van de cortex liggen. Maar dan is nog steeds de kunst, kunnen we daar signalen uithalen? Hoe bepaal je nou de activiteit in de verschillende lagen? Stel, dit is een schematische weergave van de verschillende lagen van de cortex. Dan is wat wij meten slechts een geblokte versie daarvan. En is aan de rechterkant wat we meten. Daar zie je niet meer mooi dat blauw en rood en groen in. En dat was dus de volgende stap. Hoe zorgen we dat we die verschillende laagsignalen er toch uithalen? Dus ik heb nieuwe statistische methodes ontwikkeld om daar een betere schatting van te maken. Zodat je niet ziet van ja, ongeveer van blauw naar rood gaan we naar groen. Maar gewoon, dit is wat het is. Vervolgens dachten we, oké, nu hebben we alle methodes in plaats om daadwerkelijk die lagen eruit te halen. Laten we eens kijken wat we vinden. Dus vinden we verschillen in de lagen van het brein. En wat we weten van andere studies, is dat je bijvoorbeeld verschillende laagactivatie krijgt als je mensen iets laat zien, versus als je alleen maar ergens je aandacht op richt. Dus we vroegen mensen in de scanner om of hun aandacht links of rechts te dirigeren, of, en af en toe lieten we strepen, die zebrastrepen, de gratings noemen we ze, zien. En het idee is dat het verschil tussen wel aandacht en geen aandacht een ander signaal in de lagen oplevert dan als er wel een visuele input is. En inderdaad, we hebben een visueel effect gevonden. Als je die strepen laat zien, zie je heel duidelijk dat er achter in het brein een flinke activatie is. En dat zie je in 3 verschillende visuele gebieden. En ook als daar bovenop nog aandacht voor een bepaalde stimulus komt, dan zie je ook activatie. Maar we hebben geen verschil gevonden in daadwerkelijk die lagen. Dat is jammer. Maar toch was het een mooie studie. En een mooi resultaat, vonden we. En een van de dingen die we met andere mensen hebben geprobeerd, zijn iets andere setups van een dergelijk experiment. En daar hebben we wel dingen gevonden. Dus de vraag is nu, hoe komt het dat wij niks hebben gevonden, maar andere mensen wel? En daarmee kom je dus ook met de vraag van, hoe zoeken we nu verder, zodat we allemaal zeker weten dat we op dezelfde manier zoeken en dat we elkaar kunnen controleren, zodat we zeker kunnen zijn van, er is niks, of ja, je hebt het gewoon niet goed gedaan. Je hebt het gewoon niet gevonden. En wat ik hiervoor heb gedaan, daar is het stekelvarken. Ik heb een programmaatje gemaakt, namelijk Porcupine, en het staat voor Porcupine Creates Your Pipeline. En Dat is een heel slecht grapje, maar dat vonden we grappig. En dit is een programma om alle verschillende analysestappen aan elkaar te knopen. Dus wat ik heb gedaan, is een programma gemaakt waar je alle analysestappen die je gebruikt, die doorloopt in een MRI-proces, achter elkaar geplakt. En ik heb dit heel makkelijk deelbaar gemaakt, zodat iemand anders mijn analyse precies over kan nemen. En een paar van die blokjes, dat zijn de eerste hoofdstukken waar ik het net over had. Dat zijn een paar analysestappen in dit proces. Dus, wat ik heb gedaan de afgelopen paar jaar, is me gericht op de centrale vraag: kunnen we activiteit van verschillende lagen meten? De stappen die we daarvoor moesten doorlopen zijn eerst van, kunnen we de vervormingen oplossen die zorgen dat we überhaupt niet weten waar die lagen zijn? En dat is gelukt. Vervolgens hebben we onderzocht van, kunnen we dan ook die laagsignalen eruit halen? En ook dat is gelukt. Vervolgens hebben we gekeken of er iets is en ja, we hebben geen verschillen gevonden. Maar ik ga er toch een vinkje zetten, want een negatief resultaat is net zo goed een resultaat. En vervolgens hebben we een programma gemaakt om gemakkelijker verder te zoeken naar meer signalen in lagen en om te kijken hoe dat brein nou daadwerkelijk werkt. Dank jullie wel daarvoor. Having presented the summary of my doctoral thesis, I return the floor to the rector.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Professor Marcel van Gerven of this university.
Dear candidates, first of all, I would like to congratulate you, your promoter and co-promoter, on a very interesting thesis which I have read with great pleasure. Also, as a professor in AI, I'm really happy to see that you've been working on developing the next generation of computational models in this field. Of course, I have been asked to ask you a few nasty questions, so here it goes. So in chapter 3, you are working on the development of spatial GLM, and you basically show that in simulations it works really well. At the same time, you also mentioned that there are several assumptions that have to be met. Constant laminar signals across an ROI, normality of errors, orthogonal regresses, etc. So if these assumptions are violated, which they tend to do in practice, these methods tend not to work that well. So what are your ideas on how to bridge this reality gap and to develop the next generation of models which takes these assumptions, relieves us from these assumptions, let's say?
Right. Honourable opponent, I do think this is a perfect moment to ask one of my parents to read out a proposition, because this is a central theme of the second one, I think. Yes, the second one.
The elegance of mathematical rigor is only relevant when data conforms to mathematical assumptions. This thesis.
Because this statement basically lies at the heart of the answer to your question. The first thing is not so much how do we find new methods. No, first the question is what assumptions are we making? And in creating this new GLM, basically that's what I've become keenly aware of. Can we figure out what it is that we are assuming about our data? And one of the reasons that the GLM does not work is that we're basically inverting a model. And what would be nice, for example, is to see if we could work the other way around. So work forward, with forward modeling instead of backwards modeling, as we're doing with a GLM. And what I see as a good future approach is more going like the Friston way, the forward modeling of putting in different types of signals in different layers and comparing that to what we have, what we're actually measuring, and making those comparisons rather than only inverting the model and inflating the noise terms. This is a difficult process. What I have become aware of is that what isn't possible is just throwing machine learning, just throwing more GLMs and different penalty terms on it, because what we've become aware of is that everything we do in order to obtain signal, in terms of penalizing the regression that we do in chapter 3, is making an additional assumption about the data. For example, stationarity across bin or stationarity across time. And what we found out is that all of those are not orthogonal to what we're actually interested in. So that's what makes it really hard, and that's why I've been struggling with exactly this question. So that's a long answer for saying, I don't really know, but if I were to place my bets on anything, it would be a forward modeling approach and seeing if we can, from the ground up, build the layer models and compare that to our measurements.
Okay, so as a Bayesian, I would say that the forward modeling part is like half the answer, right? So in the end, you do want to solve the inverse problem. So if we cast this into a Bayesian formalism, you could actually combine these forward models with specific priors on how we think biology behaves, right? So how do you feel then about casting it in this framework? Should that be the way forward? Or would you say, no, we should not go there. We should just rely only on simulation-based work? Only the forward modeling part.
I think we should never only rely on simulations.
Well, let's say the forward modeling part. Because you're basically saying we don't need to invert this model, right? We should just compare.
No. I think what we have been doing classically is just look at our data and see, right, how can we, given our tool set of statistics, how can we invert models? I think that is the wrong approach, because we have not been thinking enough about what it is that causes the signal that we've got. And that is a mindset that I really like about the forward modeling. So that's why I'm advocating that.
Okay,
rather than just saying we shouldn't look at the inversion problem at all.
Okay.
Is that an answer to your question?
Fine. Do you have some time?
A brief question, yeah.
Brief question. So about your Porcupine pipeline. So at some point on page 112 you mention by visually creating a pipeline, the conceptual understanding is prioritized over the implementational details. Mm-hmm. So I would like to know if you think that cognitive neuroscientists should be allowed to use your analysis pipeline if they do not understand the implementational details. So what is your view on this, and what would be the best practices according to you?
That's a very good point. I've had long discussions with another of the opponents about this, and let me highlight what I think Porcupine should not do. I do not think it should only make things easier. My main goal with Porcupine was to facilitate good practices that aren't happening currently at all, like the sharing, easy sharing of data, easy graphical insight. And that is one of the reasons and basically all of the people that are completely new to fMRI have indeed come to me, oh right, Porcupine, that can analyze my data, right? And then I'm like, no, that's not how it works. With Porcupine, you can only do whatever is already there, whatever you know to work in general. You need to know which FSL or SPM functions you need to plug in. But I recognize the danger. I recognize that people might use it too too easily, and it might indeed encourage people to only copy data without knowing what they're doing. I do not have a good solution for that, except saying, well, as soon as you've got the graphical insight, you also have a reviewer that can better review that whole process. So I hope those things counterbalance. I hope that's an answer to your question.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. Then we continue the opposition with Professor Turner from Max Planck Institute Leipzig.
I too would like to congratulate you, first of all, on pursuing this idea of using the GLM for laminar-dependent MRI analysis to a point where one can see its virtues and indeed its limitations. I think this is doing the whole field a great favour to to have pushed it to this point. But I want to turn your attention, first of all, to the recursive boundary registration technique, which was the first thing you did in your thesis, and refer to the quotation on page 35. It must be noted that it is challenging to find an objective metric by which the quality of the registration could be quantified. Mm-hmm. There is an issue about the gold standard for when you've corrected the contours enough, given that you're trying to map one image on which is distorted into another image which is not distorted. The question really is, and this is a slightly technical question which I hope you've thought about, the echoplanar images are distorted in a specific direction, the phase encode direction. Have you considered the question as to whether you know that you've done the right thing with your distortion correction when you find that all of the corrections you've made are in that phase encode direction?
Right. First of all, thank you for the compliment on my thesis, Honoured Sir. And as an answer to your question, basically you're asking if you apply the method, given that it can move in all spatial directions,
yes.
If you find that it's only the phase encoding direction it moves in, then you're on the right track.
Yes.
Well, that is a way, then still it is not a gold standard. We chose to go for a slightly different way. So as you can read in the chapter, we chose to manually distort the function from a volume that we knew that was not distorted, and we tried to find if we could go back.
Yes.
We felt that was a better way. One of the problems with the solution that you're suggesting is that you also give the algorithm many more degrees of freedom to work under. Whereas when you know that the solution is should be one-dimensional because of the phase encoding distortion direction, the most logical thing to do is not to let it correct other things of which you're unsure they're there. Well, let me get back on that. That's not entirely true. If you only use it for validation, then yes, you could do that. You might make the algorithm less sensitive, though, because your multi-dimensional field in which you're looking for the minimum is harder to estimate. But yes, it is possible.
I could point out that the precision of co-registration from motion correction algorithms is often incredibly high because you've just got a lot of data. So this might also be the case with this distortion correction algorithm, that you might have enough data that you can afford to do that. But anyway, at least you've thought about this. But I wanted to raise another question in regard to the recursive boundary registration, and that is, you're using boundaries. You're using grey-white boundary and the grey CSF boundary as your characteristic boundaries that you're trying to match up between the distorted and undistorted images. What can you tell me about the definition of the grey-white boundary? How good a boundary is that?
How good a boundary is a grey matter, white matter boundary? Well, the myelinization changes gradually rather than very discreetly. So I think that's what you were hinting at.
Yes.
So is it perfect? No, but it's the best we can do, I would say. Image registration techniques have shown that it is by far the best way of co-registering volumes. If the gradual, let's see, then still, even if it is gradual, the point of the midpoint would still be the point of steepest descent, which is what we're looking for in the algorithm.
So that's defined in the algorithm already. You have a criterion.
Yes.
That's good. Though the grey-white boundary in cytoarchitecture is very strictly defined. Can you tell me what the definition would be in cytoarchitecture?
The strict cytoarchitecture, probably it would be the cell. The answer is no. That I can speculate that probably it is a certain cell type that is present at the lowest boundary.
Yes, it's neuronal cell bodies that are in the in the grey matter, but not in the white matter.
Right.
If they were in the white matter, then you'd have real trouble. But
yes, absolutely. It sounds reasonable.
Okay. Do I have time for one more short question? Yes.
Very short question and answer.
This relates to a comment on page 114 about the sensitivity of MRI as a function of field strengths. I think that your answer there needs a little revision.
Could you please read me the
okay. Yes. Well, initially the SNR was thought to increase almost quadratically, a power of 7/4. This was later shown to be only mildly superlinearly, and with a linear decrease of the voxel length, its size in SNR decreases cubically, so that the resolution may not improve much with higher field strength. Now, there have been, over the last 2 years, there have been a number of papers which discuss the field strength variation of signal to noise. Would you care to review those? Would you change your mind on that statement?
So,
A short answer.
Well, the short answer would be my main activities throughout my thesis have been method development for everything after the pictures came out of the scanner. So can I tell you exactly the supralinearity? The answer would be no. I do remember to have discussed this in detail with my promoter. And I'm reasonably hopeful that he would have picked it out, but the answer is no.
Well, I think that's a good answer. I think
there's good news, so it's much better than linear.
It's I'm very happy to hear that. Then
Now,
I'm hoping that. Sorry, no,
Yeah,
it was a short answer. Please.
yeah, you gave a short answer. I think you're also happy with that.
Okay, yeah.
So we move on with Professor Beckman from this university.
Thank you, Rector. I also would like to congratulate you. It's a very fine piece of work, and congratulate the promoter and the co-promoter. Can I ask one of your paronyms, because it's so much fun to start reading a sentence on page 51. The one that starts, however, after the L0 norm on B.
Uh-oh.
Tim, I don't know what L0 norm is.
The bracket with the B and the two and the lines next to it, Tom.
Right, the L0 norm.
Yeah, okay.
Starting with the first?
Yeah. However.
However, okay.
Starting with however, right.
However, these techniques bias the results in a certain direction.
Next sentence.
As this is undesirable for subsequent analysis, we do not further discuss them in this paper.
Yet at that point, you start introducing one bias after the other. Would you care to revisit that statement? Particularly, I'm interested about your bias that you sensibly introduce by the form of your omega.
Sorry, which page was it again?
Page 51.
Page 51. After that, I'm starting to introduce biases one after the other. Which biases are you referring to? Because
The model itself is so for instance, if you look at omega, you parameterize that with a length scale that includes some smoothness. So do you think that on the basis of this, for instance, you could throw, let's say, multivoxel pattern analysis at the estimated time courses and start using MVPA on the time courses that you are extracting using the spatial GLM?
Let me go one step back first. So this is what I already discussed with Professor van Gerven. You can start to introduce new types of prior knowledge, but unless they're reasonable assumptions, the only thing you're going to do is bias the results. So the only reasonable assumption that we could think of that was at least as easy as possible to test was introducing the generalized least square, the omega for spatial covariance. So that's the reason we decided to test that. Your question basically is, could you insert different omegas? Could you insert
keeping that omega as is, could you actually, I mean, the purpose of this procedure is to extract time courses.
Yes.
That have laminar resolution.
Uh-huh.
And naturally you could think of someone thinking, oh, can't I use MVPA on these time courses? Or can't I use representational similarity analysis on these extracted time courses?
No, you wouldn't do that. I'm sorry.
You wouldn't. Well, why not? That's the answer I'd like to hear, but I would like to hear your reasoning as well.
Right. Well, I think the RSA method was reasonably debunked by the Therian paper 3 years ago, or at least mentioned that you should use it cautiously. But I'm unsure as to your question. Would you like to insert some type of RSA metric in the formulation of the, or would you do it separately?
No. If someone came to you and said, okay, once I've run your spatial GLM, can I run MVPA on the output of your analysis? What would your answer
On the
be?
outcome?
The outcome of your analysis, the spatial GLM, which is time courses.
Just the time courses per layer? Mm-hmm. Oh, no. Definitely, right. Then I understand your question. So at that point, what you have done is traded in spatial cross layer, sorry, not cross layer, along the cortex, you have traded in your information for temporal information. So you lost everything spatially specific, which is the very thing MVPA relies on. Mm-hmm. So no.
Good.
It's okay.
I'm happy with that answer.
Sorry, yeah.
I'm happy with that answer. I would have been more happy if that was stated clearly in the document.
Right.
Because I think that is a major restriction. Do I have time?
I didn't even realize that people could do that.
I think it would be better to move on.
Well, then we move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for clearing this up.
Okay, we continue the opposition with Dr. Petri Doe from University Medical Center Utrecht.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Dear candidate, congratulations for your very thorough work. It was really a pleasure to read. Also, congratulations to your promoters. I wanted to ask your opinion. I'm going to ask about Chapter 2, the recursive boundary registration, which is it's a nice technique. It's tested thoroughly with a presumed ground truth. However, it also relies heavily in the segmentation of the gray matter with respect to white matter in CSF. And for that you use free surfer for the most part, as I understand. And we know that there can be quite a few errors with free surfer that will really spill into your analysis, and I think it's kind of obvious in some of the results. So I wanted to hear your opinion about this. How severe is the problem? What was your observation in your data?
Madam, you're absolutely right. Free surf is by no means perfect. Neither is any, not even CBS tools. I'm sorry, but it's better, but not flawless. My answer, first of all, would be, well, if you want to do this in order to do laminar analysis, then you want to make sure that the boundaries are good to begin with. If they're not, well, garbage in, garbage out. So
my point.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So what we try to make clear in the paper is that if you want to use this on regions where you checked if your boundaries are correct, or at least correct enough in the free surfer anatomical scan, then by all means go ahead. If you find your regions have errors, then this method's not going to solve it. Nothing is going to solve it until you have manually or programmatically corrected those regions. Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, it does, and actually kind of moves it further, because I wanted to ask you if the tools that you developed can actually help in correcting those segmentation errors, for example, with either the RBR or the spatial GLM, because you use spatial information. Maybe
right.
You can also apply it in improving segmentation. Is that possible, you think?
So I would be hesitant, and the main reason is what I discussed with the prior opponents, because now you're trying to make something iterative, whereas so that has the risk of double dipping. So I would be hesitant. First of all, the RBR itself I wouldn't use for it, simply because it uses as a very strong prior knowledge correct boundaries. And it is not made for correcting boundaries. It is actually looking for anatomical detail. If that anatomical detail is not there, you will find low contrast. And the way it is currently programmed, it would be quite a stretch. Basically, the new method would be just figure out what the contrast is across the boundary, and in low contrast regions, you might presume you got an error. That's the extent to which this method could be used in the manner you're describing. As for the GLM, I think I would refer to my previous answer. You would be starting to presume things about the data that you later on want to investigate.
No, but you can apply it on the structural scan as opposed to the functional scan, only for the purpose of segmenting. So you have quite a clear difference overall between gray matter and white matter on your T1 weighted image. Maybe spatial GLM could help in figuring out strong deviations within the boundary.
So, right, one of the things you could do, the question is indeed apply the spatial GLM on different parts of your brain and see what comes out. The question is, after that, what would be your decision criterion to move on? And we've had this problem in the past. We have indeed applied it on different regions. And the first thing we saw very quickly is that there is a wide variation across regions to begin with. So that's why we never even went down the road of investigating what the best criteria would be for correcting the surfaces.
So it sounds like the eye is still the best way to go. In
The eye? Well, right, in correcting. Yes, I think so. That's
Good. Those are the answers we like.
the eye is quite a good machine learning algorithm.
So,
really.
Thank you. We continue the opposition with Professor Dumoulin from University of Utrecht.
Dear candidate, first I'd like to congratulate you as well with your beautiful thesis and also your supervisors. And I think it's really beautiful that you go from methods development to applications. And so I had some questions about the application. So chapter 4, where you look at the influence of spatial attention across layers.
Mm-hmm.
And in your results, your first conclusion, you say spatial attention increases the fMRI response amplitudes, which seems plausible enough, given most of our literature. But then I was looking at figure S2 on page 83. And in particularly the condition where you don't actually have a grading present. You have the figure in front of you?
Yes.
Yep.
The second one.
Well, 83 is the main figure, which is also called S2.
I thought you said S, the supplementary on 87.
Yeah, it's called S2, but...
Oh, right, yeah. Oh, they're both S2.
Yeah.
Sorry, that might be a typo.
That was not my question.
That's so I presumed, yes.
But if you look at the red curves is where the attendant conditions is, and generally the red curves are above the blue curves. But I think generally 0 has a meaning. So if you actually look at the grading absent conditions, so the two lower curves, the red curves is actually around 0, where the blue curves is below 0. So I'm actually not sure whether attention actually, in this case, increases the response amplitude, but it seems like it would decrease the response amplitude. So I wondered if you had any comments on that.
Well, if there's an inhibition, so this might just be the motivation on it to that I answered the previous question to Dr. Petridou this morning. I was very curious what she meant by inhibition and how that would be present in her results. And this is something we've discussed amongst ourselves quite a bit, and the answer is that we aren't quite sure what the representation of the 0 line here is. One of the reasons is that it's an event-related design, a rapid event-related design, with an implicit baseline, and it is not just a block design where we had a clear 0 condition. So,
but sorry if I can interrupt you, because in figure 1 or S1, there's just a few pages before, you have a clear baseline, right? And that is before you actually have presented the task. So I assume that is your baseline.
Yes, hopefully. If that is, so yes, the answer is that should be the baseline, and hopefully our mathematical precision will actually point that out. We were not sure how you could interpret this, as attention is the default and not attention would decrease. We don't know what a negative activation could be like.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, what is a positive activation like, and how do we know that?
Well, if we believe the famous logothesis paper, it would be the result of a postsynaptic input. And
the famous logothesis also repeated this for negative bold.
Would you repeat this?
The same experiment that you're referring to when he looked at negative bold or decreases in fMRI responses. And he
Sorry,
also,
what did he repeat for negative bold?
so I'm assuming
So
that the famous Locatides paper is where he looked at fMRI activity and co-measured it with electrical...
With monkeys,
yeah.
yes.
And he did the same experiment where he was looking at negative fMRI response amplitude, so not increases in response amplitude, but decreases in response amplitude. And he found that that correlated with decreases in neural response amplitude. So a decrease in neural responses.
Yes.
And if we look at...
Sorry, please.
So if we look at PRFs, we also see center surround configurations in PRFs with a negative surround, where the negative surround can be manipulated in certain cases. So I think it would be fair to interpret this as inhibition or suppression of neural activity.
Okay, yeah.
So would you change your title in this case?
Well, attention is still the difference between them. So then the question is, it would just move the goalpost to an extent. Would I change the title, Investigation of Layer-Specific Bold during Visual Attention? No.
Okay, so maybe we should, if I can ask you to take a look at your figure 3, which is actually the main figure, right? Looking at activity across layers. And the first thing I have to point out is a little bit of shame, but this is kind of the culmination. The figure is so small, because I do need reading glasses to read them. But you see there, if you look at this sort of where the no grading is present, you do actually see a decrease in across layers. I'm not sure if that's something that I'm kind of imagining, or whether you tested for that. I'm wondering, is this also real?
We looked at it. It wasn't significant, if I remember, and I'm still thinking about your previous question about what attention is, and I'm still inclined to say that it's the difference, that it's measured as a difference between attended and unattended. That is why I would still talk about the positive effect of attention. The main question then is, what is the interpretation of, what is your baseline in general? Because it would mean that you're always attending everything.
No, I presume that if you go back to the data, and if you have an event-related data set, that you would actually see a decrease in the response. This is what your data would show, and if you would actually plot the data, the raw data points, according to the analysis, this is what it would show, right? According to baseline, which is your mean luminance gray screen. Anyway, I wanted to ask a little. Well, do I have time, or should I wrap up?
I think we should move on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Then we continue the opposition with Dr. Bazin from the Netherlands Institute for Neuroscience in Amsterdam.
Dear candidate, thank you for a very nice thesis to read, and particularly I want to congratulate you for the fact that it is refreshingly honest about the limitations as well as the achievements that you made in this very, very complex and very advanced type of work. So my questions will be more on the, maybe a bit more going back to the geometry of the layering. So first of all, of course, I'm very happy that you've looked into building an equivolume type of model for your special GLM approach. But, and I cite, you said, we calculated the cortical lamination in a way that differs slightly from the Van Aert methods. And in essence, the way it differs is by the fact that you're using a Laplacian representation of the surfaces as an embedding system, even though the Laplacian has been shown to be a very poor representation of the cortical folding. And you had a Turkey window that increased smoothness. So my question there is, do you think this adds a lot of imprecision, and whether or not that imprecision is biased towards different layers or different geometries?
Thank you, Annette. First of all, yes, honesty is something I hope is present all the way in my thesis, but I would like to make a small side note to your comment about the Laplacian. Yes, the Waynard paper showed that if you indeed use the Laplacian in the Laplacian steps in segmenting the data, then you're doing exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to. But what the Waynard paper does not show, and what's still a reasonable assumption of the Lebrun's paper, is that the cortical the neuronal fibers follow a Laplacian in going from one side to the other side. And then you can still have that trajectory and segment them in an equivolume way. So I think we use the Laplacian slightly differently than you mentioned, and I think that's a relevant distinction to make. Do you agree with that?
Yes, but the point I was making is that
sure.
the Laplacian that you use with the 2K windowing has impact on how you measure curvature and
sure.
how smooth your curvature estimates are corresponding to reality.
Right, you're right, sure. So I was getting to your question. I just first wanted to clear up this point. So if we agree on that, I think that there is measurement error in all in all estimations of curvature, especially curvature as a second derivative is highly error prone. So does the Tukey window cause smoothing? Well, yeah, that's the nature of a Tukey window, absolutely. So I'm not denying that. The question that is more important is the second one. Does it bias your result? I don't see how it would bias it. I don't have an argument for or against it. It's something we should really look at. The only thing I can say is that if you do not do it, you get curvature estimates on the voxel level that are sometimes so outlier prone that is probably worse than the current estimation. I know that CVS tools have a different implementation of curvature implementation, and I'm totally up for using that instead. I am not committed to this implementation. The motivation, and I'm going back to the honesty again, I suppose, is the convenience that there was an implementation from Maastricht that we collaboratively improved to work reasonably. And given the data that I had no reason to believe that there would be any bias to be introduced by that. I would be very interested to hear if you have a reason, though, why you would bias.
Well, if you think about it in terms of the regions of high and low curvatures, you will see that in so-called regions, typically where you have very, very tight folds, you will have a worse estimate of curvature with that model compared to, say, gyral banks. And so in this case, you have a bias.
Let me rephrase my point.
On that side.
I'm not suggesting that this does not introduce bias at all, but I am saying that I don't think the bias is worse than the outlier and the extreme behavior in exactly the case that you're describing.
So you would say that it has no effect in terms of the data you're looking at right now?
I would say that in the case that you're describing, very gyrified regions, it is going to be difficult to estimate always, because the number of points that you're describing for that you're using for describing the surface is increasingly inaccurate. And therefore, that is the fact that will translate into the eventual bias. more that than the estimation procedure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Then we continue with the last opposition, Dr. Robert Oosterveld from this university.
Okay. Dear candidate, beste Tim, we've had a lot of time over the last few years to discuss various aspects of your research, but I should say that we've mainly been spending time on something that is like interspersed throughout your whole thesis, which is the open science aspect, like you sharing the data in the different chapters, but also sharing the research methods. And of course that culminates in chapter 5, where you describe in great detail how you have developed a strategy for sharing analysis strategies, not only your own analysis strategies, but also making it possible for other people to share analysis strategies. And that's a chapter where I want to exchange some ideas with you. So when I was young, I was very much interested in technology, but at that time technology was not so sophisticated. So one of the things that I did is I would, for example, take a small torchlight and I would glue it with a piece of tape to a car and I would drive around, so it would have like an electric car. Okay. Of course, technology has moved on quite a bit, and I should say I'm still playing with Arduinos, with Wi-Fi boards. So nowadays I have like small modules like this. Let me see that I can demonstrate it, which still have like a small blinking LED. It's Wi-Fi enabled. I can program it myself. It's way more sophisticated, but at the same time, it's not necessarily convincing in my house situation, in my family, to say, well, this is really something that we need. There is certainly a certain inertia in adopting new technology. And although I can stress all the fancy aspects that a Wi-Fi module such as this have, my spouses don't necessarily agree with me, this being the next biggest thing after sliced bread. So that is something that I see as a potential challenge also in the methods that you're describing in chapter 5. So there is quite some inertia in the scientific field, like the colleagues that we have around us in the Donders Institute might not necessarily agree with you in them adopting new research methods. I can clearly see that there's a technology push. There's opportunities for doing research in new ways, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be embraced by your colleagues. So I would like to hear your opinion about how you think to deal with this inertia in your research environment in adopting the methods that you're describing in chapter 5.
Right, thank you, Honor, for the compliments. The adoption of Porcupine and any of my methods in general, has always been a difficult point. It is ill-rewarded very often to advertise loudly, and that's also not in my nature. So also in the Donders, this has been, well, an active concern for me, but, and especially because at the Donders, the gap is quite large. We are very inclined to reinvent the wheel 90% of the times, and basically that's also the way we start getting better acquainted with fMRI in general. So then replacing that with Porcupine would be difficult. Where I see the main wins, the gains, is maybe not so much with the audience at the Donders itself. For example, the users of CBS tools, as your neighbor showed this morning, started out with this graphical interface. And I think that would be very helpful. Users of NiPipe that are interested in boxologies already are very interested in, indeed, turning that workflow around. So I indeed noticed some friction at the Donders because the gap between the methods is too large. Therefore, one of the things that Professor Ivan Tony at some point said, I think this is a very good method for people to use after their PhD. And basically the point there is that you indeed need to be acquainted with the method, and this comes back to Professor van Gerven's point earlier. What Porcupine should not do is to only make things easier, but thereby making the real thing that's happening less transparent. Instead, what I'm hoping to do is empower people to do new things that they haven't been doing before, like working in a version-controlled system by automatically saving it to GitHub, like immediately executing a graphical workflow from somebody else, or just adapting the very first module for the input data and having reproduced someone else's work, or just forking the analysis and start building on that on your own. I think these are all opportunities that the Donders might not be quite ready for. But I do think that many other universities, especially Stanford, MIT, hopefully Amsterdam, where they're using CBS tools or the new NIRES tools. But that's basically how I look at the adoption rate of my tools. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then we still have some time left. I think Professor Beckman was very enthusiastic in continuing the discussion, but maybe we will not get there. But go ahead. You've been stopped twice now. Okay. The defense is hereby concluded. I give the floor once again to the candidate.
Having defended my doctoral thesis to the best of my ability, I would like to thank the rector and my supervisor, as well as all those who have honored this ceremony with their presence.
Okay. The doctoral examination board now retreats for its deliberations.
Okay. So. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could just very briefly have your attention. For those of you who haven't attended a PhD defence before, it's this is not actually the end of the day. The informal and sort of rather more fun ceremonies are going to continue with the party, which is at Café Faber. Yes, okay, I should probably know that, at 5:30. and everybody is welcome. There's going to be food and drinks, and we may possibly make a little bit of fun of Tim as well. So you're welcome to come and join for that. Those of you who absolutely definitively will not be attending, for those of you, Tim is going to be out here after the defence, and if you'd like to go and give your congratulations to him, then if you absolutely have to then immediately dash away. For the rest of you, Tim would appreciate it if you would give your congratulations tonight at the party, and you're all very welcome. Okay.
On behalf of the Council of Deans of Radboud University Nijmegen, we have decided to award you the degree of doctor. I invite Professor Norris to discharge the task assigned to him.
In the name of the Lord, with the power entrusted by law to the Council of Deans, I hereby confer upon you, Tim van Mourik, born in Leiden, the title of Doctor from Radboud University Nijmegen, to which are attached all the associated legal and customary rights and duties with respect to academia and society. As proof thereof, I present you with this doctoral diploma signed by the Rector and the doctoral thesis supervisor and co-supervisor.
Please be seated.
So, dear Tim, it's my privilege and honour as your promoter to be the first to address you as Dr. van Mourik. So I'd like to congratulate you, of course, and your family, your partner, your paranymphs, and I look forward, of course, to celebrating this in some style later on. But I also now have the pleasure and privilege of holding the laudatio, which allows me to speak for a maximum of 8 minutes on your virtues and to scatter a few pearls of wisdom liberally amongst my deliberations. So perhaps we should start with a history, and in this history we'll of course see that you and I are in some ways mirror images of each other. So you suddenly appeared in my life via email, and this was an incredibly fortunate coincidence for 2 reasons. First of all, you showed up with skills. You had obviously decided that something like programming graphics for gaming was not the deeper meaning of life, so you wanted to use those skills for something more beneficial like science. And you had 3D graphics, you had physics, you had computing skills, and at the same time I had some money, which is quite unusual actually. And I could appoint you as a research assistant, and you started off working for Peter Koopmans, and this was very important to me because Peter was leaving us, and with his departure all our knowledge on laminar ephemerae was going as well. So you had the chance to pick up, at least on the analysis side, some of the experience that we'd gathered during Peter's PhD. And so you rather bravely joined us as a research assistant with some vague promises from me that at some stage we should be able to find a PhD position. And I did indeed spend quite a lot of time worrying about how we were going to find a PhD position, but then the Language and Interaction Consortium came up, and I had one of these brainstorming sessions with Peter Harcourt where we did one of these weird deals which are done in academia. So upon condition that I, the physicist, could obtain funding for a cognitive neuroscientist to do outlandish things with lamina fMRI and language, Peter, the language expert, would generously, and indeed he did generously, provide the funding for a physicist to work alongside so-called cognitive neuroscience expert Daniel, sitting in the back here, on this project looking at lamina fMRI in language. And this was, of course, a completely ridiculous thing to do because everyone else was concentrating on very early areas, visual, motor. And so after a year, already more than a year in our group, you got a position as a PhD student. And you were never really, as I think we've seen, an MR physicist. You were always the physicist in the MR group, and this is how your time developed. This is where I realized, amongst your other attributes, you are both critical and sometimes a tick obstinate. So I had to write a description of your thesis. Always working under time pressure, I produced a description which was kind of stream of consciousness, after which I realized I should probably have consulted a lawyer before sending it to you, and after several versions of back and forth, we finally agreed on what the target of your thesis was going to be. I think I've still got this document on my computer, and you started working towards your thesis, and I have to say, I really enjoyed our interactions over the years, and I've enjoyed your critical approach and also your honesty, and which you also showed today in the defence. And after a lot of hard work, and I have to say really hard work, you produced this thesis. And perhaps the audience got maybe a slightly negative view of the thesis. After all, people saw this attentional experiment as being rather a negative result. And that was indeed our role. I was always the sort of boundless optimist, and you were the somewhat bounded pessimist in this. But I really would also like to say that Tim worked fantastically with other people. Right? And there have been really 3 or 4 other projects here which have yielded so-called positive results, which wouldn't have come to fruition in anything like this way without the efforts of Tim. So apart from working very hard on his own thesis, Tim was really quite a team player. But Tim had many attributes, right? And perhaps I will fire a few of my own propositions back at you. Tim is a great teacher, right? Tim really likes teaching people things. If you are incapable of explaining mathematics to people on the cognitive neuroscience masters, Tim will do it for you. Tim really sees the inadequacies of your translation of mathematics to people who have studied psychology and can really talk to them. And the thing is, surprisingly, they're not afraid to talk to him. Whereas for some reason, they are very afraid to talk to me. So I think at least 3 generations of CNS masters have benefited from not understanding a word of my lectures and then begging Tim and even offering him payments and all sorts of other incentives. To help them out with their maths. Right. So that's really fantastic. Of course, being a great teacher can mean sometimes, as somebody once put it to me, that you can be a little bit belehrend, and that can also go maybe perhaps a little too far. So I remember vividly the occasion on which you devoted a half hour of your time to teaching one of the other PIs at the Donders how he should construct a balanced 2x2 design for laminar ephemerae. But I will point out that in recent years you have mellowed somewhat. Right? Another thing I can say about Tim is that he's a patriot. He's not a nationalist, but he's certainly a patriot. We have every now and then group drinks, which means we all go down the pub and talk. And one of the best occasions in recent years was when somehow Tim has been our representative Dutchman, you see. I mean, we have a multinational group which has gone so far that at various times he was the only Dutch person in the group. And at one stage, he decided to hold a fiery talk about the virtues of Admiral de Ruyter. Yeah. Much to the astonishment of everyone else, whose main attribute, I think, was that he sailed down the Thames and set fire to London in the reign of Charles II.
That's right.
But also, Tim is a Donderian. I mean, Tim is almost a Donderian first before everything else. If there's anything going on in the Donders, Tim is there at the heart of it, right? Absolutely. If it's wear a suit day, I think it's got a better name, but Tim is there in his suit. If it's Friday afternoon drinks, Tim is organising it. At one stage, someone said, the centre has grown so large, no one can tell the name of everybody who's in the room. And Tim kind of said, well I can. And I think it's actually true. So Tim is a real team player, team player. So in conclusion, I would like to say a few words. I've really enjoyed it. I've seen you mature. I've seen you develop. I'd also like to say I'm impressed by the way in which you have now decided to follow this pathway with team science and the development of these software tools for doing reproducible science, and you've stuck to it, right? And I think the qualities you've shown of critical thought, openness, dialogue, honesty will stand you in very good stead in the future. And I hope that in the short term that you can realize these aspirations that you have. Whatever happens, I wish you all the very best. And I'm confident that you have a successful future ahead of you, whatever you decide to do. Ik heb gezegd.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to also congratulate you on behalf of the Council of Deans and to include in those congratulations your family and partners. Before we end this, it's customary to say a prayer, and for that I would like everyone to stand up. Gratias tibi agimus, omnipotens Deus, pro omnibus beneficius tuis, qui vivis et regnas per omnia saecula saeculorum.